What's up, Vegas? We are back. Vegas is fully open now. Man, we're off to the races. I've been out the last few weekends. Excited to just connect with so many people. Opportunities are coming for the podcast. I'm here with Grant Frailich. He is the founder and president of the Pride Tree. I almost butchered that already. Wow. Also, thank you for the lovely shirt and the merch that comes from it. It is much appreciated. The Pride Tree is a nonprofit focused on supporting LGBTQ plus youth and allies. I'm sure there is a little bit more depth to that, which we will touch on as well. So thank you, Grant, for coming on.
You know, you nailed it. Thank you for having me. And I'm just excited to be here, and I'm excited to see Vegas reopening.
Right. We are popping your podcast cherry in person.
That's what we're doing. I mean, we got 30 Days of Pride coming up tomorrow, so I'm just excited to be here, and we got a lot of things coming up next month, so I'm excited. Thank you for having me.
We'll make sure to address that because this recording will be about 2 weeks from posting, so It's perfect. I appreciate you for reaching out to me. That's why I love the direction of this podcast, because now I don't have to reach out to people. People just kind of find me, but I love talking with founders, entrepreneurs who are solving an issue, creating value, because you never know who may interest you. You never know who you may help. And so let's just start from the beginning so we become familiar with each other. Give me, a 2 to 3 minute context of who Grant Frailich is.
Yeah, so a little bit of my background. I grew up in just a family of helpers, and I grew up in a family where we were always volunteering and we were always trying to do something to help other people. Went to Arizona State University, graduated, and got a master's in business management, joined Teach for America. So have you heard of Teach for America before?
I actually have had one person on before who used to work for Teach for America.
Okay, so Teach for America, they basically take people who are really driven and ambitious and motivated. They train them and they put them into low-income schools across the country. So that's how I ended up in Vegas. And I taught elementary school for 2 years with Teach for America, continued teaching elementary for 4 more years. This past year, when the pandemic hit, I had the chance to go open up a new charter school, opened up a middle and high school in North Vegas called Explore Academy. And when I opened that school, I started teaching older kids. And I started learning a lot more about the issues that LGBTQ plus kids deal with. You don't really have to deal with that when you're working with 9 and 10-year-olds. When you're working with 13, 14, 15-year-olds, it starts to come out. Mm-hmm. And I mentioned that I grew up in a family of helpers and the whole volunteerism aspect. I have volunteered with an organization in Phoenix which runs a camp for low-income kids. I've worked with them for a decade. You ever been to summer camp before?
I act as a Jewish individual. That is usually something that we fall under. I never had the opportunity to as well, but I had so many fraternity brothers who just went to was it BYN or something YN? And all
I was going to say BYOB.
BYOB.
It's BBYO.
BBYO, that's what it is.
Yeah. So, I mean, your friends have seen it. Mm-hmm. Camp is a very, very powerful experience. I volunteered with camps for 10, 15 years. So I came to Vegas. I was teaching older kids. I started learning about the issues that LGBTQ plus youth have. And one day this kid comes to online class, 15 years old, gender fluid kid. Her name's Kylie. And Kylie was clearly really upset. And I tried to talk her down. Like, look, you're a 15-year-old kid. Whatever's going on, it's not that big a deal. You're fine. And she stays after and shares with me, hey, yesterday somebody found me on Insta and sent me a DM saying, send me explicit pictures of yourself or I will find you and kill you.
And how young was she?
15.
Yeah, it's traumatizing.
Kid can't drive a car yet. And she's dealing with that. And I asked how she coped. And she said she tried to talk about it with some friends who muted her because she was being annoying. And I started really thinking about how many kids have to deal with issues like that. I've never had to deal with that. I am not LGBTQ.
You're not.
I am not. No one has ever come to me and said, I can't love my wife because she's a woman. No one has ever come to me and said, I'm not allowed to identify as a man. But those are things that kids, 15, 14, 13, 12, have to deal with on a regular basis. So I sort of merged these ideas and I came up with the idea for Camp Pride Tree. Your friends who went to camp, I'm guessing they probably stayed in boys' cabins. And then there were also girls' cabins, boys' camps, girls' camps. Camp is amazing, but it's very, very gendered. I was always the guy who was like, look, if a girl's cabin wants to throw some makeup on me, throw a skirt on me, and, prance me around camp, I don't care. What do I care? So we want to run Camp Pride Tree in 2022, and we want to give kids this traditional summer camp experience, but taking out all of the gender norms involved. Camp, for as great as it is also still just a small part of the year. So the breakdown on Pride Tree, we're running Camp Pride Tree, but we're also running these after school programs. And we're already working with one school. We have agreements with 2 others, and we're expanding from there. And with this Club Pride Tree program, we talk about all the hot button things that people don't like to talk about with kids. One of the first things we talked about was navigating the coming out process. There are very few groups that like to talk about that stuff with kids.
Because there's no one direct way to go about it.
There's no one direct way to go about it. It's different for everyone. And for a lot of people, it's uncomfortable talking about gender and sexuality with minors. It is a delicate conversation. What I tell everyone is, look, human identity forms as a teenager, rebellious teen. Gender and sexuality are key parts of identity. I don't think anyone can argue with that. But very few people like having that conversation about identity with kids. So what we're trying to do is we're trying to go directly to schools and have that conversation with kids. So we talk about coming out. We talk about pronouns. We talk about laws that protect the LGBTQ community. You hear in the news a lot about laws that are discriminating against LGBTQ. There's also a lot of legal protections in place. Kids don't know about that stuff.
Yeah, because you don't see that in the news. The news only focuses on the discrimination and the hate or, things that direct towards them in a negative manner. Mm-hmm. But there are a lot of positives too, a lot of things that protect them. But I don't know why it just isn't ever discussed.
Kids don't ever learn about Stonewall. I didn't learn about Stonewall until I was in college.
What's Stonewall?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, I don't even know what that is.
Exactly. So Stonewall Inn, gay bar in New York City, and you used to have police raids on gay bars where they would just arrest people for being gay. So Stonewall was basically the birth of the gay rights movement. Police attempted to raid it, and the people inside Stonewall basically said, no, you aren't going to keep treating us like this. They fought back, they protested, and, that was, again, kind of the birth of the gay rights movement, where a lot of people started to realize, wait, it is insane to arrest someone for anything that they're doing in the privacy of their own bedroom. It's crazy. It's crazy.
So for these after school programs,
yep,
is the curriculum directly surrounding history, tough conversations? Are there activities?
Yeah, so we have a structure to all of our activities, but we also give people freedom to really structure the conversation however they'd like, in whatever way is going to be most beneficial for the kids. So we have topics. We have the topic, I'll walk you through the pronouns one, for example. We have the background discussion, the guiding questions, some background knowledge for teachers and some resources, websites, things like that for teachers. But it's also designed to allow kids a chance to just talk, hey, what do you already know about pronouns? What questions do you have about pronouns? I tend to think that a lot of times kids don't have their opinion respected. People don't actually ask kids questions very often. And kids hear about this stuff. They hear about pronouns. They see that you can set your pronouns on Insta now and things like that. But they don't often learn anything about what any of that stuff means. So that's our goal, is to give kids that chance to learn about pronouns, learn about navigating coming out, learn about whatever in that safe environment. We don't have an agenda. We are not trying to convert anyone to anything. We are inclusive of every gender, every sexuality. It's not my job or my place to tell a kid who to love or how they should identify. I am a married straight white guy. I know that.
And being a married straight white guy gives you a different perspective. Obviously, you haven't been in their shoes, but you see it from a different perspective. Yeah. And so that gives a lot more insight. And to me, I think it gives a lot more credibility because I haven't spoken with anyone involved in the LGBTQ community who isn't an actual member of that community because of their direct sexual orientation.
Yeah. And I will say on that as well, I am super proud of the Pride Tree board because as we were recruiting this board, I knew that I did not want everyone to be like me. I knew that we needed LGBTQ voices. I knew that we needed people of color on this board. So the majority of our board identifies LGBTQ. The majority of our board are people of color. We have Black women on our board. We have bilingual board members. We have educators and people working as accountants and in law. And we really have a diverse board and a talented board. I'm the only straight white guy on that board. So I talk a lot about there's times when I need to step up and there's times when I need to step back.
Yeah, straight white males have received a lot of negative stigma or flack recently because
deservedly so in a lot of cases.
Do you receive any criticism because you are a straight white male operating this nonprofit?
I think that's where the board diversity really comes back into play. Example, with the whole coming out lesson or session we did, I did very little in that session. I haven't lived that experience. I can't say anything on that. And I'm not going to come in here and pretend that I can. But we are actively trying to be inclusive. So I approached one of our board members who is LGBTQ. I approached a friend of mine who is LGBTQ. Both of them came, both of them talked with the kids, and they both shared their experiences. One of them came out at 12 and received pushback. One of them didn't come out till 30 and received pushback. The kids got to hear those perspectives. That's a great example of me stepping back. I don't need to do anything in that session. I can't do anything in that session. In terms of pushback, again, we just fall back on we have no agenda. We are not trying to convert anyone to anything. We're just trying to have conversations and we're trying to include as many voices, straight, gay, Black, white, Hispanic, doesn't really matter. We're trying to create that type of organization.
Have you always felt empathetic towards this community, or were you more interested towards helping youth in any manner possible? Like where does the where does this come from that you want to go about this mission to help people? I've had a bunch of nonprofit founders on here that their love and passion generally stems from youth, the youth kids, and that seems to transgress to other areas of youth. So where does this where does this come from?
All right. I'm smiling because I'm about to just be a complete bummer for a minute, but my grandmother was a Holocaust survivor. And my grandma was on a train headed to Treblinka, which is a death camp. And my grandma was lucky in the sense that she was able to jump off of this train and survive. And it ended up being just her and her brother, who spent a couple years at the end of World War II, moving all over Europe, surviving in hiding from the Nazis. And I'm bringing this up because one of the things that my grandma always said to us after the war was millions of people died because ordinary people sat back and remained silent and said, not my problem. I don't want to be controversial. I don't want to take a stand. It's not my issue to care about. And I'm not trying to compare anything that the LGBTQ community has gone through to anything that's happened to Jews during the Holocaust. I'm not trying to do that. But that same idea of people sitting back thinking not my problem really stuck with me. So I've always cared about helping kids in need. And it started off with just helping low-income kids. And then as I started going through Teach for America, I started learning more about kids who are undocumented and students of color. And after that incident with Kylie, that 15-year-old, again, it just went back to how no one has ever treated me anything close to what Kylie had to go through. And there are so many kids in Vegas and so many parents in Vegas that struggle with these conversations about gender and about sexuality. And there's so many parents where their kid will go to them and say, hey, I'm non-binary, and mom and dad just don't know how to deal with that. 25% of homeless youth in Vegas are LGBTQ.
Wow, that's huge.
Yeah. That's the 15-year-old kid that goes to mom and dad say, I can't deal with this. Get out.
Do you happen to know a percentage of youth in Vegas that is LGBTQ? Do you happen to know that?
I don't know. It's difficult to get stats on LGBTQ because think about it. If someone just called you up right now and was like, hey.
Yeah, and if you're afraid to come out, then you're not going to answer it correctly. Right. Or if they're still confused around their own orientation.
Yeah. Now, the numbers I've seen are somewhere between 5 and 7% of the entire Vegas population.
Yeah, and 25% of those homeless are
25% of homeless youth.
Yeah, is LGBTQ.
Yeah.
It's massive.
And I don't want to get like too deep into the weeds with numbers, but I also started looking. Do you know what a GSA is?
No, what is that?
It's a gay straight alliance. So 40% of Nevada high schools have a gay straight alliance. First of all, 40% is not as high. I mean, that should be 100%.
It should be.
Second, of those 40%, how many are truly active and doing something beyond just let's put a bunch of kids in a room together? Mm-hmm. Maybe half. So you're talking 20 to 30% of Nevada high schools
are actually efficient in that category,
are actually having any type of discussion about this. And I mean, think of the thousands of kids then that are not being served. So that's where we come in. And that's what we're trying to do is we're trying to bring that after school programming. The other thing, because we bring our programming directly to kids at schools, it makes it so much easier for them to participate. Imagine if I assume you're straight. Mm-hmm. I don't. Yeah, I was gonna say I don't know. Yeah. I shouldn't make that assumption. So imagine if you approached your parents when you were a 13-year-old kid and said, "Hey, mom and dad, can you drive me 30 minutes to this weekly program?" Would your parents have done it?
I would have had to walk there.
And I always say my parents probably would have driven me, but there would have been a lot more question marks. It would have been a lot more of a hassle, whatever.
Mm-hmm. And some kids want to keep that in secrecy.
And some kids want to keep that secret. The kid has to be comfortable talking about that with their parents. If there's a kid where they're comfortable telling mom but not telling dad, there's issues there. We want to eliminate all of that. So we're not going to ask 13-year-olds to come to us. We're bringing it directly to kids. We're also working on a mentorship program. We're working on parent programming. We're trying to really scale this thing to be a really meaningful, impactful organization. And we're small right now, but we have a lot of momentum.
How do you go about scaling it? Is it some sort of funding mechanism that you need attached to it? Is it that you just need more volunteer work?
Honestly, we need a pandemic to end is what we need. There's a few things going on. So our overhead is pretty low. Our costs are pretty low because we're running it on site at schools. And right now we're running it with volunteers. Ideally, we could pay people at some point in the future, but the overwhelming majority of our cost is camp.
But that's the most effective from what it sounds like.
Well, it's a signature program. I don't want to say it's most effective because they're all effective in different ways. They all fill different needs, but camp is going to be our biggest cost. In terms of scale, we are planning to start, we already have partnerships with 3 schools. We've talked with about 6 or 7 more, and we're probably going to roll out at 5 to 6. We roll out at 5 to 6 schools in the fall. And then at the beginning of 2022, we up that 5 or 6 to 10 to 12. And we run our first camp. And then we just go from there. So honestly, it is a question of getting schools that are willing to take a stand on this and do the right thing. And we've been fortunate that we haven't had too much pushback from schools or parents yet. I think that people realize that LGBTQ rights are human rights at the end of the day.
Yeah.
So
that was going to be one of my next questions was, have you received any pushback or been highly questioned by any of the elementary schools, middle schools, or high schools to adopt their program?
Yeah. So right now we have been very fortunate that we haven't received too much pushback. We're working with middle and high schools first. We may scale down to elementary in the future, but if we do, we are going to modify the programming, of course.
Do you think, is that because approaching or bringing this program to students that are so young, they may not be ready for that conversation?
I hate that wording. I hate the too young wording because I've heard,
or maybe they are unable to comprehend the magnitude of that conversation.
Yeah, I think that's probably a better way of looking at it. But I think if you ask a lot of members of the LGBTQ community, they know when they're 4, 5, 6, 7 years old that they're different. So I don't want to say it's too young. I will say we probably would encounter more pushback trying to bring it to an elementary school. And frankly, I do think that cyberbullying and whatnot is a bigger issue with middle and high schoolers than elementary schoolers. It is in the future plans. Here's the pitch to schools. If you are a school that has a mission statement that says anything about multiculturalism, a global society, inclusiveness, respect, tolerance, diversity, anything like that, you want Pride Tree there. We're free to you. I mean, our programming does not cost a school anything. You need to provide students, a teacher volunteer, and just access to your facility. And I think we're doing good work and we're making it easy on people. And I think that's a pretty powerful combo.
Yeah, free anything, right? That's generally right, especially in the educational curriculum of Nevada, where they're generally underfunded and can't provide excess capital to fund some of these programs.
Yep.
It's a pitch that you would assume most would accept with open arms.
I mean, and so far we've been very fortunate. I mean, we have a wait list at this point of schools that want to work with us. And one of the things that's been really interesting so far is when I have conversations with people about Pride Tree, oftentimes that conversation will spiral off into 2 or 3 or 4 other connections. So we have this wait list of schools that want to work with us. We have this wait list of community organizations that want to work with us. We have partnerships going on with our 30 Days of Pride campaign. I mean, we are young, but I think that we are really entering the hyper-growth stage / in that hyper-growth stage.
Are you in communications with any other LGBTQ nonprofits in the city? And if so, how are you guys going about collaborating in a unison effort?
Yeah, so I'll give you a great example. The Center. The Center is obviously the big dog with LGBTQ groups in town. They were the very first group that I reached out to back in December of last year. A great organization. So next month we have a 30 Days of Pride campaign. And with this 30 Days of Pride campaign, our goal is to spotlight different members of the Vegas LGBTQ plus community. We reached out to the Center and we have Vince Collins, who's one of the workers over at the Center. He filmed a video for us, which we can then post on our social pages for 30 Days of Pride. Vince put me in touch with CJ Edwards, who runs the Black Queer Men Las Vegas group, which has meetings at the Center. So we now have connections with the center through CJ, through Vince. I've talked with a couple of the people in their youth department over there. We have the conversations with all of those nonprofits, and I'm hesitant to call us a LGBTQ organization because I don't want us to just live in that box. Of course, that's who we're serving primarily, but I also want to be inclusive of allies. And as I was researching a lot of other organizations, they threw in allies as an afterthought. And it was like, oh, sure, you can come to this program, but I never felt super welcome reading the language that a lot of organizations use. So I want to be conscious that everything we do, of course, we're working with the LGBTQ groups in town, but we're also talking with like Raise the Future, Junior League. One of our biggest partners right now is Make-A-Wish of Southern Nevada. And their VP of Mission Advancement, another guy who filmed a video for 30 Days of Pride, just a gem of a human being. He hooked us up with Vegas Lights tickets. So we're going to have Pride Tree night at the pitch. And that's thanks to Make-A-Wish. So we're all about the partnerships. We're all about working with other people. Anyone that wants to work with us, reach out. We'll find ways.
I have a few names of a few people that I've had on here that I'll definitely give you after this. That'll help, especially in a city like Vegas, where we're kind of still in this foundational growth period of culture.
Yeah.
And so it's really easy to connect with anybody through 1 or 2 degrees of separation. It's not like some of these more fully developed where it's like you have to go through so many hoops and ladders and levels of a political system just to talk with somebody.
Yep. And, we have this advantage because we are starting out. We can build things right from the ground up. I've always been fascinated by what makes organizations effective. What makes a business succeed versus fail, what makes a nonprofit succeed versus fail. And right now, it took us a while to file our paperwork because we wanted to have that diverse board in place. That's going to pay dividends down the line. I look at some other organizations and they are now struggling with these conversations around diversity, equity, and inclusion because
it wasn't implemented from the start.
Yeah, they didn't do it right from the get-go. So we're trying to avoid that stuff. That's the benefit of being young, like we are.
You have to be very meticulous about the way that you construct your entity. It's very important. And sometimes you don't realize it until it's too late.
Yeah, I had a conversation the other day with someone who used a great analogy. Again, I am not trying to knock the center in any way, shape, or form. The center is great, but the comparison they used is the center is like the Titanic. It's been around, luxurious, it's big. Ignored the jokes about, sinking ship, whatever, because I don't think they're a sinking ship. But the center is the established big dog that's luxury, that knows kind of what's going on. Pride Tree is that small, kind of sexy speedboat that can make changes on a dime and be agile and really modify things. We're the young, scrappy startup right now.
What's up, guys? We're going to take a quick 60-second break to give a shout out to the first ever sponsor of the Guest List podcast. And you guessed it, it's none other than Manscaped. Manscaped is the most popular men's grooming product in the world. It is something that I live by. I make sure that I use it before I go out and hit downtown Vegas, Fremont Street, go down to the Strip. It's something that gives me more confidence to go out and have a good night. And as we know, Father's Day is right upon us. And what a better gift than to get your father his very own Manscaped. And if you use the code TheGuestList at manscaped.com, you'll get 20% off and free shipping. Once again, that's 20% off and free shipping. And if you don't feel comfortable getting your father one of the most popular men's grooming products, they do offer a few other select products as well. They have a nose trimmer, they have ball wipes, they have a crop mop, they have cologne. You guys could go over to that website. They have some underwear, which I'm currently wearing right now, or you could get a cool shirt like this that I'm wearing as well. They have the whole package. So once again, make sure that you guys go to manscaped.com, use the code TheGuestList. You guys are listening to The Guest List. Very simple. Use the promo code The Guest List to receive 20% off and free shipping to anywhere in the United States. Thank you guys for listening, and let's get back to the show. Well, you also have to be aware of how fast society develops and the exponential growth model, where something like the Titanic is so big, it has an inability to growth and pivot to whatever society's throwing at it. Where if you're this sexy speedboat, you can, like you said, you could be very agile and be able to take on, some of these adapting trends, like things like social media and just being in person and on the forefront.
Mm-hmm. And one of the other things that I want to put out here is when I was about 26 years old, I was diagnosed with ADHD. Never knew I had ADHD when I was a kid. It explains everything about me. It explains why you ask a question and I respond in 5 minutes instead of just giving you a simple answer. With ADHD, essentially your brain is constantly racing to the next thing, and it's constantly trying to make connections and figure out how you can optimize things. It is perfect for entrepreneurs. You look at someone like Richard Branson, and Richard Branson has ADHD. There's a lot of examples of entrepreneurs who are able to just connect dots that other people can't because of ADHD. It's definitely a curse in a lot of ways, but with something like Pride Tree, it's a blessing. And I just like sharing that because that's another one of my many passions is there's a lot of kids out there with ADHD that don't have support and feel like they're different. So I've always been about helping people that feel as if they're different in some way or othered in some way.
Smart. So we've been discussing pretty much the mission, the foundation, and the structural components. I do want to dive into one of these kind of quote unquote hot button topics surrounding LGBTQ, which is the pronouns, right? Yep. As you mentioned earlier, Instagram now added that into your profile. It seems to be a topic of conversation pretty frequently in mainstream media. From your perspective and what you have seen through Pride Tree and talking with the youth, what is the miscommunication? Why is it so confusing? What's going on with the pronouns situation?
I don't think it's confusing, frankly. I think trying not to, excuse the language, I'm trying not to be too big of an asshole as I say this. I think you call someone what they want to be called. And I look at that kid, Kylie, and Kylie is gender fluid. Her birth name is not Kylie. And her pronouns when she was born were male pronouns.
Hold on, before I'm just going to pause you 1 second. Yeah. Describe what gender fluidity is.
So essentially Kylie will sort of shift back and forth between how she identifies. Most of the time she identifies as female, but there are times where she basically feels more masculine. Mm-hmm. And that can be a confusing concept. Sure. Have you ever heard of the idea of dead naming?
Yes, that's something that you see happening on Twitter now, and accounts actually get banned for. It's when you call somebody by their previous name, right? So if you called Caitlyn Jenner by Bruce.
Yeah. So the example with Kylie, and I feel bad even doing it here, but Kylie's birth name is Brogan. Mm-hmm. And in all of the attendance documents and basically all of the legal documents that a school has, it's Brogan. And teachers for the first probably month or two of school called her Brogan and used masculine pronouns. And Kylie is very good at advocating for herself. It took until December before I realized, wait, this is really messed up. If we're calling her Kylie and she likes being called Kylie, why are we not changing this in all the systems? So I sent some emails and was able to help get that changed. I think that the people who do misgender other people, the people who dead name other people, it's pure selfishness. It's people saying, look, I'm uncomfortable with how you identify, so I'm going to put my comfort above yours. And that really ticks me off. It doesn't hurt you in any way, shape, or form to call someone what they want to be called. It just doesn't. Mm-hmm. There's no harm to you, and it's a world of difference for the person. So there's no good reason why you should be misgendering someone, why you should be dead naming someone. Mistakes happen, sure. But there's a big difference between an honest mistake and an honest slip up versus someone deliberately using the wrong pronouns.
Yeah. It seems like a lot of this with the pronouns comes down to semantics and your own interpretation of how you view that word linguistically. For me, when somebody wants to be called by a specific name, if you kind of just classify all names as gender neutral names, like Ashley can be interpreted, and it has been interpreted for decades as a male and female name. Yeah. But if you take that perspective and you just apply it to all names, then you kind of, it becomes like a non-issue in a sense.
Yeah. And I mean, I think you just said it. It is a non-issue. It's something where this is not a perfect comparison at all, but before the podcast started, you asked, how do you pronounce your last name? I've had so many people over the years call me Frailich. Obviously, that's not the same as, misgendering, but I appreciate the fact that you took the time to ask, hey, how do you say your last name? Because it shows, oh, this guy respects me enough to actually say my name properly. It's not a perfect comparison, but it's not that different either.
Yeah, you never know how the other person is feeling internally or the misrepresentation that has been kind of attached to them throughout their entire life. One of the reasons why I bring up this name, because one of the biggest public figures who brings up the pronoun issue all the time is Ben Shapiro, right? Like, regardless of your opinions of him, he views it from a religious standpoint and talks about how there is no gender fluidity, and it's either you're born a male or you're born a woman, and you can't basically change it based off of your mental well-being without it being physically changed, right? Going through like a sexual change. And he takes a really hard stance in that. And because since he has a large following, a lot of people tend to identify with him as well because of that. Mm-hmm. And so it causes a lot of confusion because somebody's like, hey, there is a male and a female, right? Like, at some point, I guess, appearing physically, it appears as though you could only be one or the other. But going through the conversation, somebody's perspective is constantly changing, right? The way that you view the world is constantly changing. I'm generally never married to one idea because you never know how society is going to evolve. Mm-hmm. So this is where some uncertainty comes into play, or doubt of the authenticity of that person's feelings.
Yeah, I'm going to say two things on that. So I've seen a graph on Instagram lately, and I'm really hesitant to be like, oh, I saw this on Insta, so it must be true, but it does seem logical. It's a graph that shows people at school used to, if they were left-handed, they would be forced to write with their right hand. And I think it was the 50s or 60s when they stopped forcing kids to write with their right hand, and the rates of left-handedness skyrocketed. Oh my God, there's so many more people that are left-handed now. No, you're just not forcing them to write. You're just not forcing them to do something that they aren't, physically equipped to do. And I bring that up because it's not like trans people are new. It's not this new hip invention. Like, you can go back throughout history and see, and there's been different terminology, and oftentimes it's been really hush-hush taboo, but transgender individuals have existed for a very, very, very long time. The other thing that I want to bring up in terms of just the Ben Shapiro pronoun thing, are you familiar with conversion therapy at all?
Yes, that is something that Mike Pence that was like the hot button thing with him as he was becoming vice president.
Yeah. And I'm trying really hard not to like get up on my soapbox right now, but look at the stats on LGBTQ kids that go through conversion therapy, and don't quote me on the exact number, but I want to say they're 2/3 more likely to attempt suicide. Think about it. If you went to therapy and you were told you're not allowed to feel this way, your feelings are invalid, you are invalid as a human being, that is an appalling feeling. And Ben Shapiro, Mike Pence, anyone like that, you are basically saying your discomfort with something means that you're willing to increase the rate of youth suicide. You're willing to allow kids to die because you're not willing to call them what they want to be called.
Yeah.
Tell me if my logic breaks down here.
No,
but
it breaks down. From my observation, it seems like, and the point that we're talking about, right? Ben Shapiro comes back with a very Orthodox Jewish background. Mike Pence was very hardcore Christian, right? And from a lot of LGBTQ community members that I've associated with, I used to have gay roommates, like I hang out with them all the time. Many of the people who find themselves in this community actually disidentify from religion. And it seems like because religion tends to negate their persona because it doesn't fit within the historical context of whatever religion you're affiliated with.
And one of the things that I've discovered with that as well is there are certain churches and synagogues, and I'm sure mosques as well, or I would at least hope mosques as well, that are becoming more and more accepting of the LGBTQ community. I think even having this debate is a little bit, I don't know if insulting is the right word, but look, these people exist. They're going to continue to exist. They always have existed, members of the LGBTQ community. And regardless of what a church or synagogue or mosque wants to do with that, it's bring them into the fold.
Yeah.
Just bring them into the fold, because you could look at it from the ethical standpoint and just from the moral standpoint, it's the right thing to do. And that should be the end of the argument. But if you want to go a little bit more cold-blooded, hey, you want more people to donate to your church? You want more people to show up at your services? Go be more inclusive.
Yep. That's where the extremists of all religious affiliations tend to become distant to the mainstream population, right? Yeah. I grew up a conservative Jewish guy. I never really identified with the real Orthodox section of religion. And you see that just happening more with the younger generations, is like they don't want to be boxed into and being predefined, whether it's religion, your sexual orientation, your views. It's not something we need to have fluidity within our own opinions in society.
Yeah. And I have this saying that I use all the time. Extremism is bad, period. Extreme left, extreme right, extreme Christian, extreme Jew, extreme Islam. Extremism is bad. And obviously that's simplistic and whatever. You could argue the semantics on that. But just in general, again, Ben Shapiro's life is not negatively impacted in any way because Kylie wants to be called Kylie. I was at Kylie's house earlier and Kylie came out so I could drop off a Pride Tree shirt and Kylie was wearing a dress. I'll confess it. I mean, did I have that split thought of, oh, that's interesting. Kylie was born male, but is wearing a dress. Sure, I had that split thought. But who cares? Mm-hmm. How does that negatively impact me? I gave Kylie a shirt and said, good to see ya. Have a good rest of your day. Bye. And I don't really understand why there are people that choose to go so far out of their way to hate other people because of that. What's in it for Ben Shapiro?
Views.
Yeah. Yeah. So even there, great. So you're going to stir things up to get views.
Yeah, that's what the media does, right? That's mainstream media inherently well. But I am beginning to see a trend where the younger generations are beginning to notice that it is propaganda more so than actual facts. And they see that not just from mainstream media, but some of these other leaders in different sectors and areas as well. Or maybe just the world is becoming more woke, but not extreme woke.
I think there's a lot of nuance in the world, and I get exhausted thinking about all of the nuance. There are a lot of times when I wish that my brain was able to be like, yes, this is 100% good or 100% bad. But that's just not how my brain works. And frankly, I don't think that's how the world works. There are very few things that are 100% good and 100% bad. And I am hesitant to trash, mainstream media or anything. But I do think that independent journalism and, I've been getting into like NPR and the Associated Press and like the boring news because it's going to give you the facts. I also just think that you can have multiple things be true at one time. And people don't like nuance. People like catchy little sound bites.
Right. Yeah.
People like catchy headlines.
The world is not black and white. It's gray for everything, right? And that's how we end up with like the LGBTQ. It's like you can be confused. You can not understand where you want to be. If your factual knowledge grows throughout your life, right? If you're continually learning, then your opinions are going to change. Mm-hmm. But we never truly figure out who we are. Even today, as I sit here, 29 years old, I learned more about myself over the last few years than like all of the other years combined through like all of the trials and tribulations that I went to. So as you grow older from a youthful age, you begin to learn more about the world and you apply that to yourself. So therefore, maybe your sexual orientation changes. Maybe you meet somebody who changes you, like love is something that I don't think we've been able to solve yet, at least scientifically, but it has a profound impact on the way that we view ourselves and others.
Yeah, absolutely. There's another kid involved with Pride Tree who's 13 years old. And I was talking with her. She helps us out with our communication stuff. And I did not know she identifies as LGBTQ. And she shared this with me after a year of teaching her. She goes, oh, yeah, I identify as LGBTQ. And I asked her to sort of elaborate a little bit. She goes, well, right now I'm lesbian, but I don't really know. That might change later on. I'm sure that that's something that, Ben Shapiro would probably blow up about. And I looked at her and I was like, hey, great. Let me know if you want to talk. I'm still a 29-year-old married dude. I really couldn't care less how she identifies. I mean, I hope she's able to figure it out and find love and have a good, safe relationship. It's not my job to come in and say, you need to go get with a guy. That is just completely illogical to me. And please, if you see something wrong with this argument, I was actually going to add on to it. I know plenty of women who are older and have boyfriends or husbands that actually hook up with other women, and the husband or the significant other is like completely okay with it. And so it sets a weird double standard where it's like, if you're younger and have this feeling, then it's not okay. But once you're older and more mature, then it is okay because of whatever the surrounding circumstances are. Plug your kiddos' ears on this one, but if it's two hot girls, they can make out, but otherwise it's not cool. Like it just doesn't really make sense when you break it down.
Yeah. So that's why I like what you're doing, because it's so confusing for the youth, because they can see this maybe even in their own family, right? Or maybe like family, their parents, or maybe their parents are swingers or something of a different situation where they don't understand what's really happening,
even more so than that, I would say more common than that is just divorced parents. You could go off the swinger route too, but like divorced parents. So if your parents are divorced, I would argue that it probably was not a healthy relationship. So you can't really go to your parents as the model for a healthy relationship then. So where can you go? That's where an organization like Pride Tree comes into play. You kind of keep going back to that idea of it being confusing and whatnot. It is confusing, or it can be confusing, but that's where just asking kids comes into play. Ask a kid what they want to be called. And you will make mistakes. You will mess things up. You're going to, use the wrong pronouns on someone, or you're going to use the wrong name on someone. And you know what you do? You apologize and you make it better in the future.
And move on.
You apologize and move on.
So when you're connecting with the youth group, are there any other common topics or conversations that seem to surface more often than others?
In terms of what specifically?
Let's say you have an after school program, right? And you want to talk about something that's a hot button issue or something. I guess if you're connecting with a new, I wouldn't say student, but there's somebody that's new to Pride Tree, right?
Yep.
Like, what would you say is the most common topic or question that they're asking you guys when they're new in Pride Tree?
Yeah, so I think that there is still sort of this natural apprehension about, if I join a group like Pride Tree, people are going to think I'm gay, and somehow that's a bad thing. We have one kid who's sort of dancing around the outside of Pride Tree right now, and he just finished 5th grade. He just came out to his parents, and he is not really comfortable with having this conversation with a lot of people right now. So he's dancing around with Pride Tree because he feels like if he ties himself with something like Pride Tree, people are going to look at him differently, and people are going to think less of him in some way. And he told his parents, I'm not like a normal gay kid. And his parents' response was, okay, what is a normal gay kid? He's like, I don't know. And then they showed him pictures of like 80s hair metal bands, and they're like, what do you think about this? So I think there is still that hurdle because being LGBTQ is becoming more normalized, but it's still not completely normalized. Even in this conversation, I operated under the assumption that you were straight. Mm-hmm. That's a misstep on my end. I guess I probably owe you an apology on that.
No, I am straight.
Okay, well, there you go. So I think that that's probably one of the biggest hurdles that we are working to overcome is just this idea that, look, we're not just for people who are LGBTQ. If you are LGBTQ, wonderful, fantastic. If you're not LGBTQ, great. As long as you're interested in these discussions and in these topics, rock on. Let's have you.
Yeah. I personally have had this conversation with multiple gay friends and seen like the troubles that they've gone through and the pushback and, just people viewing them differently. A big trouble that I see is getting jobs and how they're viewed in the workplace seems to be tough as well because it doesn't fit into whatever the quote unquote image is of that workplace.
And it is changing, which is good. I think a lot about like, I'm a history nerd and a political nerd and whatever, but I think about like gay marriage 04, 05. And it was, the downfall of society if we legalize gay marriage, whatever. And now gay marriage is legal and, the sun is still coming up. Earth is still spinning. It's much more normalized now than it was 10, 15 years ago. I anticipate that the same exact thing is going to happen with just LGBTQ rights and kids, especially. Kids know. Kids hear about this stuff and they know about it from a very, very young age. So we can talk about it or we can let YouTube try to teach them about it. Your choice.
Yeah, active participation. It seems like every 15, 20 years, there's like a new certain type of specific and more kind of niche down rights movement. Yeah. I had a woman on here very early into the podcast last year named Jazz Appen. She's one of the co-founders of SWAN, the Sex Workers Alliance of Nevada. Mm-hmm. And in that alliance, they have a pretty sizable amount of LGBTQ members as well. but it's, you don't understand, like there's a lot of confusion and misunderstanding to what actually a sex worker is. But then like you see the discrimination and how some of these sex workers, sex worker could literally be just a cam girl. It doesn't have to be a full on, they call it full service worker, which is what a prostitute was.
Yeah.
It could be somebody who's just a go-go dancer, but it's like, you don't realize that. And even the LGBTQ go-go dancers get discriminated against because they don't fit that certain expertise or image. And
don't hate people. I mean, honestly, it's that simple. If somebody is not doing anything to actively harm you or actively harm somebody else, don't hate them.
Yeah.
And it's funny because I don't think of myself as this uber liberal, and I feel like I'm coming off as this uber liberal. Like, I really don't think of myself that way, but I do think of myself as someone who's like, if there is a go-go dancer and if she's doing it consensually and no one is forcing her to do this, and she like she's not hurting anyone, how does it negatively impact my life? Why would it be my place to go in and tell her to do anything different? I don't think there's a good answer to that.
There's a term on the internet, a popular phrase that I'm thinking about and saying, they live rent-free in someone's mind.
Yes.
Rent-free.
Totally. And I think about it a lot, especially with kids. God, you got me all revved up on the Ben Shapiro thing. Going back to that, look, any type of conversion therapy or like Ben Shapiro-esque saying is increasing the likelihood of a child dying by suicide. That's messed up. Fundamentally, at the end of the day, that is messed up. So Ben Shapiro's comfort should not make a child more likely to die by suicide. And I don't really know how anyone could poke any hole in that.
It's true. It is. Are there any upcoming events pertinent to Pride Tree that you'd like to mention, or anything significant?
Yeah, so right now we are about to go into our 30 Days of Pride campaign, which I mentioned already. So with this 30 Days of Pride campaign, we're highlighting 30 different people, one person every single day, who are working with the LGBTQ community, and I would say 99% of them identify as LGBTQ. So keep an eye on our social pages for that 30 Days of Pride campaign. We have 2 different events coming up. One is on June 3rd, one is on June 10th. So we have a visit with an artist on June 3rd, and then we have a movie night on June 10th. We are also having a month-long Why I Run Fun Run. And at the tail end of the month is when we're having that night at the Las Vegas Lights game on June 25th. Those are the big events with 30 Days of Pride. And you can also find all of our social pages, facebook.com/thepridetree, Instagram/thepridetree. Our website is thepridetreelv.com. And of course, anyone is also welcome to go through our website and reach out to me. I'm happy to talk with anyone about our work and how we can partner.
Exactly. Yeah, I'll make sure all of that's attached in the show notes below. Make sure you click that. I have one final question before we get out of here.
Of course.
What does Las Vegas mean to you?
Spectacle. I love Vegas. I love how grand this town is. I love that I could leave here and go to Bellagio or Venetian and have just this world-class experience. I love the food. Vegas is the pinnacle of entertainment. It's the pinnacle of fun, and it's adult Disneyland.
Literally, I use that phrase all the time.
Yeah, I was going to say, I'm not the first to say adult Disneyland.
It's such a beautiful place, but I think it's even more beautiful as a native because we can leave our impact on the city, and it's not out of sight. All you got to do is put some effort in and really push through for a few years, and you'll all of a sudden turn around and realize that this baby that you've been nursing, this business, this organization is now leaving an impact on many people, and can't hate on that.
Nope, can't hate on that. And I moved out here 7 years ago, and just in those 7 years to see Golden Knights, Silver Knights, Raiders, the indoor football team coming, the Sphere, this town is constantly growing, constantly changing, constantly innovating. And I've always loved that stuff. That's why I love Startup World.
Yep. Vegas is here to stay, guys. Super bullish. Could not be even more bullish. Buy everything. Long it. Grant, thank you for coming on. It was a very deep conversation. We got to touch some of the, tougher conversations. I know there's many more to go, and maybe in the future we can cover this again. But yeah, Brightree has my full support, and Vegas is very happy to have you.
Thank you very much. I appreciate it, and thank you for having me, my friend.
My pleasure, brother. Thank you guys for listening. We'll catch you next time.